Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of My Child, My Voice Parent Connection. I am so excited to introduce my next guest, Chris Barbic, who is the founder of Yes Prep Public Charter Schools here in Houston, also a former teacher and partner of City Fund, and also who I can call my friend. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Wendy. We were joking before that it took us doing something like this to get a chance to catch up after 3 or 4 years. So I'm glad we did, and appreciate you inviting me to be on the show.
Yes, I'm so excited as well, because I know it's like, I just love sharing great information, especially from a friend of mine and a school that my own son benefited from, which was Yes Prep Public Charter School. And I know there's some of us that don't know who you are. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I grew up just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and went to public schools all my life, K through 12. And then I live in Nashville now. I actually went to college in Nashville at Vanderbilt, so I was fortunate enough to go there. And graduated in 1992, and that was just as Teach for America was getting founded. I think the first year that TFA placed Corps members was 1990.
Wow.
And they were out on campuses. I went to I think it was a recruiting event, and heard some Vandy alums talking about their experience. And I knew this was my end of my junior year of college. I knew that's what I want to do. And it's kind of a funny story. I lived with 3 other guys, and we only had one. We were all about the same size, and we only had one suit to wear between the 3 of us that we could wear for job interviews and stuff our senior year. So the bet was whoever landed the first job got to keep the suit. And I only applied to one thing my senior year, and that was to be a TFA Corps member. So did my sample teaching, applied, did all that. And I guess it was in about May of my senior year, got the letter. I wore my suit to my practice teaching session as part of the interview. Got the letter in May, and I not only got to be in a great organization and get to teach in Texas, but I won the suit. So I got to take the suit. So my first day of teaching, I wore the suit that I had won from my 2 college roommates for getting the job, and was in Houston for 20 years. Teaching and running Yes Prep, and then came back here in 2011 to work for the Commissioner of Education, who was actually a fellow Corps member of mine. We taught together in Houston, stayed in touch. He went on to do other things, and when he became the Commissioner of Education, this was just as Tennessee won the Race to the Top grant, and he said, "Hey, I've got this job. I'm going to be, Commissioner of Ed. We've got this $500 million. I think we can actually do some great work together. Do you want to come join the team?" And so I said yes. So I picked up the family. We moved back to Tennessee in 2011, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. That's such an amazing journey. And that was a story I've never heard of. I know all of your stories, but that was one of them I've yet to hear. So that's actually pretty awesome. And one thing I always, try to ask people that come on here is, I like to know about your school choice journey. Why did you launch Yes Prep Public Charter Schools here in Houston?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I mentioned I joined TFA, and the school I got placed at as a Corps member was a school on the east side of Houston, which is, kind of the largest and oldest Latino community in the city, was a school called Rusk Elementary School. And what was interesting about Rusk was the year before I got to Rusk, the state, the Texas Education Agency, had basically declared that Rusk was the worst elementary school in the state of Texas. Wow. And if you think about that, Texas is a big state, and Texas has a lot of elementary schools. So to be the worst means you got to be pretty bad. And so what the state did was they basically told all the adults in the building, you can't work here next year. So they said you can't work here next year, and if you want to come back to this school to teach or lead, you've got to reapply through the TEA, the Texas Education Agency. And so basically they replaced all the adults. Nobody was allowed to come back. I was part of the new kind of team of teachers that was supposed to turn the school around. And I taught 6th grade. Rusk is a small school. There's like 2 kind of classes per grade. It's at the time it was a pre-K through sixth grade, and a fellow TFA core member, we both taught sixth grade together, and I had a great first year. First year was awesome. Came back for my second year, and it was about my second year of teaching when my kids who left sixth grade to go to the local middle school, which is Jackson Middle School, when they started coming back and telling me stories about what was happening at Jackson, that's when this idea of, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this. Those ideas started. And I think the clincher for me was there was this kid named Carlos Lopez, and Carlos was a great kid, not like a superstar student, but just a good kid, worked hard, tried hard, cared about school, cared about his future. His parents, were from Mexico. He was first generation in the country. And he came back to just like talk about, kids come back to say hi to their former teachers. He came back to say hi. And as we were talking, I just noticed like the light was gone. I mean, there was like, Carlos was not the same kid. And he was describing his experience at school, and there was nothing positive. Like, he hadn't made any connections with adults in the building. He wasn't feeling pushed in his classes. He wasn't getting any homework. It was just like one kind of like horror story after another. And it hit me in that conversation that as a teacher, all I can really control is one grade. I can do everything as a teacher I could do to make sure that sixth grade that Carlos and his classmates were with me was the best year I could try and make for them. But I couldn't control anything that happened before they got to my class, and I couldn't control what happened after they left. And unfortunately, where we were in the schools that the kids had access to, you could pretty confidently assume that what was happening before that sixth grade class and what was happening after that sixth grade class was not going to prepare Carlos or anybody for a successful adulthood. And it wasn't like, I'm the savior or anything. It was just like, that was the fact. And so I think that's when it was like, all right, we've got to create a school in this community. And when I say we, the parents were a big part of it. And I want to talk about that in a second. That's going to make sure that every student that lives in this, second ward of Houston has the ability to go to a school that's going to prepare them. And, our focus at the time was college because that's what the parents said they wanted. And so that was kind of the beginning of the journey. And the last thing I'll say, because I think it's an important story for the people listening, is once that idea was like, okay, we got to do this. The first thing I did was I started talking to parents and saying, look, first, I showed them the data. Like, do you know that this is the data in the middle school? Do you know this is the data in the high school? Do you know that once your kids leave Rusk, this is the quality of the education they're going to get if they stay in the neighborhood? And of course, most of them didn't know. Nobody was telling them. The district wasn't saying anything about it. And so the first set of conversations were just around this is kind of the current state of affairs. Right. And then what that led to was more parents saying, well, we got to do something about this. Like, what can we do? So we approached the principal. Rusk at the time went to sixth grade. There was extra space at the school. We talked to her about adding seventh and eighth grade at Rusk. She kind of got on board. Houston's a big school district, so there's like district soups. And they just hired this new district soup. His name was Hector Ibarra. And he came to a staff meeting and said, like kind of doing like the politician thing on the district soup, we want to innovate. We want to try new things. We want to do new things. And as he was leaving, I grabbed him. I said, great to meet you. I've got a few parents that would love to talk to you about this idea we have to add seventh and eighth grade at Rusk. And he's like, great, I'll be there. So, told him to come back in a week. And during that week from the time he left until the meeting, I just talked to every parent in the school. I said, you got to come to this meeting. This guy's coming. We want to add seventh and eighth grade. I don't care if your kid's going to be in sixth or seventh grade or not next year. Like, even if your kid's in kindergarten or first grade, eventually you're going to at some point reach this issue where the local middle school isn't any good. Right. And so we packed the cafeteria. I mean, I think this guy was expecting like 5 or 6 parents. He walked in, the cafeteria was packed with families. And wow. I grabbed him by the hand, shook his hand, and said, hey, everybody, this is Dr. Ibarra. He's the new regional soup. and he's here to help us add 7th and 8th grade at Rusk. And everyone just like stood up and cheered. And he looked at me like, you son of a bitch, you just totally set me up, which he did. And so then things really kind of took off, and we carpooled about 300 parents down to a school board meeting at Houston ISD. I had one of my kids stand up and speak, and she gave this great speech about why the kids wanted to stay at Rusk for 7th and 8th grade. And at the end of her speech, she was like, and these are all the people from the community that support this idea. And the whole place stood up. And I'll never forget, there was a board member, her name was Paula Arnold, and she said, 3 years ago, the state told us that this was the worst elementary school in Texas. And here today, we have a packed auditorium of parents who are demanding that their kids get to stay at the school an extra 2 years. My, what a change. And it was a change. I mean, to see that parents had that much, confidence in what was happening at the school, that they were willing to be there, to advocate for their kids to be at the school for 2 years. It did say a lot. And of course, the school board said yes. And that was 1995. Project Yes was born. We added 7th and 8th grade. And the goal at the time was to get all the kids from 8th grade into one of the magnet schools in Houston. Houston, I don't know how much your viewers know about Houston, but Houston has a very robust magnet school system, lots of choices. So we were like, okay, we'll get all the kids into a magnet school. It'll be a school of their choice. They'll be on a path to college. We'll have done our job. And we got the first group of kids into the magnets. And what we realized was, even though there's about 15 or 20 magnet schools in Houston, only 3 or 4 of them are really, really good, honestly, and really preparing kids for whatever that next step's going to be. A lot of them are kind of magnet in name only and not really offering a great education. So when those kids came back and said, we're not getting a great experience, it was almost like deja vu of those 7th graders 3 or 4 years prior to that coming back and telling me what their experience was at Jackson. And that's when, we were like, okay, we need to add a high school. We went back to the district. They said, you can't do a high school. There's no space in the building. But that's when by then the charter school law had been passed in Texas. And so I started doing a little research, and I said, okay, well, if we apply to become a charter, it doesn't solve our problems for us, but at least it gives us the control to try and solve the problem. And I started talking to Mike Feinberg, who was running KIPP at the time. They were kind of getting bounced around from facility to facility. He was having problems with the district. So we basically came together, wrote one big application and he had a 501c3, and you needed a 501c3. You need to be a nonprofit to start the charter. I didn't have one. So we applied off of his 501c3. There was a KIPP campus. There was a Yes Prep campus under the KIPP charter. We ran under that charter for about 2 or 3 years. And then in 2001, we separated. We had our own 501c3. We ran Yes Prep. KIPP kept growing. And, now Yes is serving 15,000 kids in the Houston area. So, but I think the key thing is that would have never happened if it hadn't been for parents early on, being part of what we were doing, and being such powerful advocates for this vision. I mean, if they hadn't come to that school board meeting, it probably never would have happened.
That's so true. Getting parents to get involved. I mean, to be honest, when I met you, I thought I was an involved parent as much. And to be honest, when I tell my story, my school choice story, I always say, it took another parent to help me find my advocacy voice, and you were mine. And for you to tell, when, as I was volunteering at my son's, school, which was Yes Prep Golfton, I was doing a lot of work, like you were saying. You opened our eyes, you educated us, and the staff there as well is educating us on the things that we need to know to help support the schools, like charter schools, and also know how do we support our kids, right? And if you hadn't told me like, hey, you know, what are you doing in 2 weeks? And I'm like, I don't know why. And you were like, well, you know, I need somebody to take, you know, a group of families to Austin for National School Choice Week. And I know you could do it. And I'm like, I don't know what National School Choice Week is. And why me? And you're like, you know, and I don't even know if I can do advocacy work, or I don't even, and he goes, wait a minute. You were like, wait a minute. You've been doing this. One, you took the first step. You took the first step to find a better fit school for your son, Joshua. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. Two, you've been organizing and educating families. That is school choice. You know, having families understand those choices, as well as knowing those choices are out there and advocating. You were like, you're doing this. This is easy for you to do. That handful that you told me that we took over 100 families to Austin, not only to like go celebrate, you know, being that we have a child in a charter school and support our school, but we were also able to, you know, talk to legislators that I thought I could never do. And that, you know, it's intimidating talking to a legislator. But if it wasn't for you seeing me as that advocacy, you know, that I can do this, you know, like, hey, every parent has this power. You just got to remind them, hey, you do have that. Yep. So one, I want to say thank you for helping me find my voice.
Well, happy to do it. And gosh, I mean, who would have thought it would lead to something like this? So you're just taking it and run with it, which I'm not surprised about, but so happy to see. You know, I think another the important thing to note about the story I told was that so many of the first generation of charter leaders were just like me, frustrated teachers who wanted to see more opportunities for their kids. And I know this term equity gets said a lot nowadays, but that's truly what it was. It was, you know, seeing so much talent in the kids in your class and knowing that if there wasn't some major intervention in what their school life was going to look like, that the chances they were going to reach their potential was not anywhere close to where it should be. And that's why a lot of us got into the charter space. And so what I love seeing now is, you know, the work that you're doing, because to me, what this whole thing's about is it's shifting power away from bureaucracies and giving it to parents so that they can choose that best fit school, and giving it to educators so they can start the school of their dreams, which is what I got a chance to do. And to me, that's what the charter movement is. It's just that power shift to parents and educators. And what we've seen 20 years later is that when you shift that power away from bureaucracies into the hands of parents and into the hands of educators, amazing things happen. And we see that every day all over the country now. It's really cool.
It is really cool. But the thing I do have to ask, because I asked this when I not only became very involved in the campus with my son, I also winded up, you know, working for Yes Prep Public Charter Schools. But you started what you said, Project Yes. Mm-hmm. What did Yes stand for? Why did you name the school Yes Prep?
Yeah. So Yes stands for Youth Engaged in Service. And our curriculum when we were at Rusk as a 7th and 8th grade school was a curriculum that was very project-based around this idea of service. So, you know, the big vision at Project Yes, and even at Yes, was this idea that we want to give our kids the best education we can. We want to prepare them to, you know, go off to college, you know, reach their potential. But it's important that the last part of the mission is coming back to Houston and coming back to their community and really taking everything that they've learned to make their community better. And so we tried to reflect all that in the curriculum for two reasons. One, because we thought that was just an important mission, that we weren't just educating kids to take a test, we were educating them to be better members of the community. But two, it was to try and make what kids were learning every day, math, English, writing, all of that, tying it to something that was relevant to their lives. Like, let's identify issues in the community that we want to tackle as a school, as a class, as an individual student. How can we identify some of those issues and then build a curriculum where we can develop projects to try and do something to address those issues? And in those projects, teach the standards around reading and writing and math. And so that was kind of the vision of the school, was better community member, more relevant curriculum, more tied to a kid's everyday life so that they'd be more engaged in school. And when we made the pivot from program in Rusk to charter school, the feedback we were getting from parents was this idea that they wanted their kids to be prepared for college. And so I was hearing that over and over and over again. And as a teacher, I was sending my kids to a school called Chinquapin. And Chinquapin is a private school, but really focused on first generation college kids. There's like no tuition. Kids go there during the week and then they come home. It's a boarding school during the week and they come home on the weekends. And as I was a teacher, I was just trying to like find my kids as many great places as I could for them to go. And I was sending kids to Chinquapin. And when I met the founders and learned more about their school, they said, well, for a kid to graduate from Chinquapin, they have to get accepted to a 4-year college. And I was like, man, that's awesome. That's awesome because you are guaranteeing that every single kid that walks across the graduation stage of graduation has the next chapter lined out. We know they're going to go do something. And 2, it's a great way to hold all the adults in the school accountable. Like, it's very clear, like we've either failed or succeeded if every one of our kids graduates and gets into a 4-year school. So I took the feedback I was hearing from families around college prep, and this idea of Chinquapin, and I was like, well, if they can do it as a private school, why can't we do that as a charter school? And so that's when we made the college acceptance a graduation requirement, and we wrote that into the charter. So we kept the youth engaged in service part of the mission, but the prep kind of signaled to staff and community and families that we're preparing kids for college and that this is a college prep school. And so we tried to kind of marry those two ideas in the charter vision, and that's what we wrote in the charter application.
That is awesome. One of the things I know that Joshua practiced and when he was in school is the Thinks and Acts. Can you explain why you created the Thinks and Acts for your students at Yes Prep?
Sure. So the Thinks and Acts was basically for people listening. I mean, this was like posters we had in the cafeteria and in every classroom. But really, what it was 2 things. One, it was a lot of schools talk about their graduate profile, meaning like by the time a kid graduates, we want them to be able to do, and it's a list of things. And for us, the Thinks and Acts wasn't what we wanted kids to do. It was the kind of character that we wanted them to take out into the world. And there's a friend of mine, Andy Smerick, who's active on Twitter. He writes this thing on Twitter all the time. And he says, character is destiny. And I really do believe that. Like, the kind of person you are, your values as a human being, what you kind of put out into the world really does kind of like lead and guide you to the kind of life that you're going to have. And the Thinks and Acts was, for us, like our stab at what we think a virtuous life looked like, what a values-based life looked like, and not the graduate profile in the sense of what we want our kids to be able to do, but a graduate profile in the sense of these are the types of people we want our kids to be. And so that was really what it was. And then secondly, I mean, anyone who's listening knows that so much about what makes a great school great is the culture. And the Thinks and Acts was also kind of like the foundation for the type of culture we wanted to build at all of the Yes Prep schools. And it was a way to articulate that, make it very clear, put it down on paper, and then really use it as a tool that we could all teach from, to not just talk about the kind of kids we wanted, or the kind of people we wanted our kids to be, but the kind of culture that we all wanted to work together in. And so the Thinks and Acts is as much about school culture as it is about, an individual roadmap for the kind of people we want our kids to grow up to be.
That is so true. And I know Joshua did. So I'm going to pivot a little bit because there was something I always wanted to ask you was, how did it feel having your own wife at the time, being a school board member for the largest school district in Houston and in Texas, really. And then being also, a superintendent and founder of a charter school.
It's a great question. I look back on those years with, those were some of the best years. I mean, at the time, I'll never forget when Natasha said she was thinking about running. I mean, at the time, I was growing Yes Prep. So we had like probably 3 or 4 campuses. We had 2 small kids. I mean, we had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, no family in town. Mrs. Martinez, who, is a parent of a Yes alum, she was helping us take care of the kids while we were working. But I mean, we were kind of like hanging on by a thread before she said she wanted to run for school board. And when she's like, I think I want to run, I'm just thinking, oh my God, how are we going to do all that? And then, I mean, her race was really tough. I mean, it got nasty. And I mean, I remember like pushing a double stroller through our neighborhood, block walking for her. And at the time I was like, how did we do that? But looking back, I mean, the busyness, the fact that we both were just so passionate about what we were doing, and really trying to do what we could to make the biggest difference for kids in Houston. It was awesome. It was complicated. I mean, during the race, there were people that were saying things like, she wants to be on the school board so that she can like funnel money to her kid or to her husband's charter school. I mean, there was all these conspiracy theories about this was like some money-making scheme, which was totally ridiculous. But we were easy targets because that was before things have gotten like they are now, where like the traditional charter wars are like full on now. This was just as that stuff was starting to like really become a thing. So it just made her race really tough. But looking back, I mean, it was, like I said, I look back on those 4 years as great years, despite how stressful and hard they were. They were awesome.
And so I think the next question, because everybody usually asks me this as well, is how did your kids feel with both you and Natasha being a school board member for an ISD and you being a leader, for a public charter school and being involved in student education? How did they feel about it? Because I'm curious to know how these ride homes from school, these conversations were.
Well, I mean, we talk about, it's like the family business. That's all we talk about. I think they hated that was all that we talked about. And I tried to be, I tried not to be the like annoying, let me, call the principal once a week and tell him or her all the things they could be doing differently. I mean, I tried to be self-aware enough to not be that guy. And I think for the most part, we accomplished that. But I'll never forget, this was when we moved back to Tennessee, and the schools in Nashville, elementary school is pre-K through 4th grade, and then you start middle schools 5 through 8. And it was one of the first few days of 5th grade for my daughter. And she came home, and I was, I did what every parent does, which is like, how was your day at school? And she looked at me and she's like, Dad, they really need to work on the transitions. Meaning like the time in between class. And I was like, it was so funny. I'm like, spoken like a true kid of a former school leader. So she was telling me they needed to work on the transitions. That was probably a good sign that we were talking way too much about school in our house. But, I'll just say last on that, I mean, we've been fortunate where our kids were in public school up until 6th grade. And when they started 7th grade, we moved both of them to private schools, and we moved both of them to different private schools because it just goes back to this idea of best fit. The elementary or the middle schools in Nashville, like most middle schools, aren't very good, most of them, and they weren't challenging our kids. And I think most importantly for my son, the adults in the building didn't know who my kids were, especially him. Like he was just kind of like invisible. Yeah. And so the fact that we were fortunate enough to have the resources to be able to find that best fit school, I think we're kind of living out, what we're trying to advocate for that every family should have is the ability to, if the school you're zoned to isn't working for you, you've got the ability, whether it's a private school, if you've got the resources, or a charter school, public, but you have an option. And thank God, we did have an option. And, my daughter graduated last year in college now, and my son's a junior, and they're both in great schools. But that's only because we had the ability to make choices. And so I think it just goes back to why what you're doing, Wendy, is so important, is advocating for every family should have the ability to exercise the same choices that me and Natasha were able to exercise, because every family that's got a kid stuck in a school that's not working for them, I can promise you, wants that choice. And it's up to us to advocate for families to make sure they have it.
That is so true. I mean, if you had to point that out to me, because something that wasn't, working for my youngest son, me and my husband had to figure something out that could be better fit for him. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I didn't know what a charter school was at the time, but when you hear from other parents that are saying, hey, this school is doing X, Y, Z, and then they're supportive, they're doing, they're sending their kids to college, and, mm-hmm. you're like, that's what I want for my kid.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that I
think of all the choices we make in our lives every day. That we decide what toothpaste we're going to buy, where we're going to go to dinner. All these decisions, and the fact that we get to make those decisions, but millions of families are told this is the school you have to go to because this is the zip code you live in, and it's 2021. That's crazy. So,
yep.
Again, what you and others are doing to advocate so families have that choice. It's the most important choice, and every family should have it.
And I think the next question is, because I know I asked you this a lot when I was going to Austin to talk to elected officials, because at the time I didn't know who mine was, and you gave me some great advice. What advice do you have for parents when they speak to elected officials in support of the school, or even in education in general?
Yeah. Well, one, most legislators have very short attention spans. So you have to kind of be able to speak in quick sound bites. And the challenge is speaking in quick sound bites, but weaving in two things. One, I think you got to be able to tell your why, why are you there? And why are you advocating for whatever it is you're advocating for? And in telling your why, I think it comes to the second thing is you've got to personalize it and make it be able to tell a very quick, short, because they do have short attention spans, personal story that connects the why, that does connect the why. And then last thing is you should never leave their office without making a request. What do you want, and be clear. So I think that would be my advice. Sound bites, personalize it, and clear requests. Those are the three things.
That is so true, because I know it's funny. I have my husband calling me right now. He must be thinking about us. So it is true, because it's the ask that you want to do at the end of that conversation. You're there, you got their attention. Now it's this is what I'm asking for you. And those are great tips that you also gave me. And now I'm able to do, and other parents are able to do that. Storytelling is such an important piece when it comes to, making changes for our community, is telling those decision makers how, and what we need in our communities and for our own families. Right.
Amen.
I think the thing is, you've been here, you were in Houston and then in Tennessee. What have been some of the positive and negative things you've seen over the years when it came to either education bills in regards to that?
I think it really just kind of centers around this idea of courage. I mean, there are some legislators who have it and use it, and there are others that don't. I mean, I'll never forget when I came to Tennessee, when I left Houston, the job I was doing for the Department of Ed was focused on the lowest performing schools in the state and trying to improve those schools. And I was in a hearing, with, I think it was the Senate Education Committee. And there was a senator who they were upset about some of the things that we were doing to try and make the schools better. One of the things we were doing was working with high performing charter schools to go in and convert the schools to charters. And basically what this legislator said was, well, of course the kids are in that school in the bottom 5%. They're poor, they're minority. Like basically, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but the sentiment was, how could we expect them to do any better, you know? And when she said that, I mean, first of all, I can't believe she said that. And I think that lack of expectation for what kids deserve, let alone what they can achieve, was probably a low point, because this was a leader, in the state Senate. A lot of these schools were in her community. These were her schools and her constituents, and for her to think about, let alone voice in public, that view of the families and kids in her community, that was probably a low point. A high point was, I mean, thankfully there's, tons of examples. I mean, just legislators showing courage, not doing what was popular, but doing what was right for kids. I mean, school board members in Nashville, charters are approved by the local school board. We just had votes earlier this week where 6 schools, all really high performing, were just approved, despite lots of negative rhetoric and lots of back and forth on a 6-3 vote. So every single one of those school board members are going to and probably already have taken some heat for that vote. But every one of those school board members that voted yes know that those schools are doing an amazing job for kids, and regardless of what heat they're going to take, they're doing the right thing. And so, I think when you can find whether it's a school board member or legislator like that, I mean, just as much as we're advocating for and trying to get people with power to do things differently, we really got to make sure that we are giving those folks that are standing up cover, because they need it. Because every time they take a tough vote, you better believe there's somebody who's going to try to do everything they can to make them pay for that. And if they only hear from one side and they don't hear from our side and all the people that have their back, that's just as important as sitting in that legislator's office and making the request. Is sitting in that same legislator's office after they've taken that tough vote and saying thank you and we got your back, and people, they need to hear that too.
That is so true. I mean, I remember, as you mentioned before, a lot of times Kip and Yes worked together, especially when we went to Austin to talk to our legislators, where we talked to a particular legislator that did not know information about, or the right information about charter schools. Mm-hmm. And it changed her mind, especially when we all went to her office, mm-hmm. And we were holding signs like charter schools are public schools. Charter schools are, are free schools. And giving her that information, I think is great, because this is so important why parents need to get involved in their school, but understand this type of school that you chose for your kid. And ours was, especially charter schools, understanding mm-hmm. that, because there's so many misconceptions and myths out there about charter schools. And a lot of times the legislators are not aware of that. And it's good to talk to them, because mm-hmm. we change their minds. Because one, like you said, we are constituents of theirs. And even though you may not be a direct constituent, your child's school is in their district. Mm-hmm. Right?
And this get perpetuated. I think some legislators really don't know. I think some legislators do know, but they just choose to not listen or believe the truth. Mm-hmm. So, having parents there that are constantly reminding them, public school, we don't cream, open enrollment. I mean, all the things that the other side likes to say about charters. It's one thing for, me to say, be an advocate, but when you've got parents who've made the, decision to send their kid to that school, the most important decision, or one of them that they'll make as a parent, saying those same things, it's just so much more powerful.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you hear it from students. I was so happy to see students stepping up and telling their stories, sharing their stories with them.
You're right. I think that's something our side doesn't do as good of a job of. I mean, I especially think about alums. I mean, we've got thousands and thousands of alums, across charters, and, an effort to really organize those guys and really have them be spokespeople, because, I mean, they're not just great examples of a great education. I mean, they're full grown adults now and have, a vote an agency that I think you're right. When we can have them be the spokespeople, they're the most powerful spokespeople of all.
And not only that, they give back to the community. I know a lot of my kids' friends have given back by either becoming teachers at a public, traditional school or at a public charter school, or they're advocating for, for parents to have more choices. I love to hear when, our younger generation is actually, getting more involved in doing that. And that's why I always say the key, keep educating yourself, no matter what age you are.
Yeah.
Right. And educate others, because a lot of times we don't know. I didn't know a lot of the things that I know today if I hadn't, one, been told, but also asked questions, right? Mm-hmm. And that was a key thing that, was great what you had started here in Houston with, Yes Prep Public Charter School. And I want to thank you, one, for that, for
Look, I got way more out of it than I gave, but thank you for saying that. It was a fun ride. I mean, I look back on those years. I mean, 15 of them is probably, some of, if not the best professional years I've had, because it wasn't just a job. I mean, it really did feel like a family. We were all on a mission. We all knew what that mission was, and everybody worked their tails off to give the kids what we thought they deserved. And so it was a blast. I miss it all the time. So thanks for saying that.
And I know you do, because to be honest, you saw Joshua grow up, my son. And I think what made me cry is not only on senior signing day when he announced the school that he got accepted and is going to, right, his college, is seeing you right there, just so excited next to us with us, giving him a hug, like, I am proud of you, And he was even grateful to know, hey, look, this is the superintendent, but he didn't look at you that way.
Great to hear how great he's doing now. I mean, he continues to make all of us proud. I mean, he's doing such a great job. I mean, he's a fully launched adult now and just kicking butt. So it's awesome. I mean, honestly, this has been fun, but I think the best part of this whole thing was like catching up with you ahead of time and hearing how Josh is doing. So I'm just so happy and not surprised at all, but so happy to hear how great, just how great he's doing.
And that's what I loved about the camaraderie and the family that we built at, our charter school. And that's every school, any parent can feel this way. Because I know I've seen you with many alums, and new or old, that still come to you and either ask for your advice or do that. And I think the next thing is your next adventure, telling us about what's the mission of City Fund.
Mm-hmm. Well, so City Fund started as part of a foundation in Houston called the Arnold Foundation. And really what our focus is to, support the creation of more high-performing schools. They're going to help kids and families graduate, lead a life of purpose, and, really achieve economic stability. So our mission is all about more great schools. We believe that, charter or charter-like schools where, the people in the building, the adults that are closest to kids, have the autonomy to make the decisions that matter most about curriculum and staffing and budget, all those things that are important decisions that every school has to make, that's the best structure for high-performing schools to exist in. And so we operate in about 15 cities right now, supporting efforts to create more of those types of schools so that more kids have access to them. And so that's kind of like mission one. There's two missions in that. One is more great schools, and then access to those great schools, so that everyone has an equal shot to get into one. And then the third thing that we're really trying to do is support leaders of color who are from the community that the schools are in. So our focus is really, underserved students of color. And we believe that supporting leaders who live in those same communities to be school leaders, to run schools, to support them, to be advocacy leaders, that's really who we're looking to support. So it's those three things: more great schools, equal access to those great schools, and supporting leaders of color from the communities most impacted by the schools, supporting them in their leadership.
That's just so awesome to hear about that. I'd be pretty pumped about that one too. But how many cities has City Fund helped in the state of Texas? I'm just curious.
So we are working in San Antonio and Fort Worth. and potentially maybe doing some work in Houston. I think a lot of it depends on, lots of things. But right now we're in Fort Worth and San Antonio. And what we support in both of those places is we work through a local partner. So in San Antonio, it's City Education Partnership, who's doing a lot of the kind of local grant making. We support their efforts, and they take, probably 90% of our funding and then redistribute that out to different schools and organizations in San Antonio. And they keep maybe 5 to 10% of what we give them to run their internal operations. And then we do the same thing in Fort Worth. And our local partner there is an organization called Fort Worth Education Partnership. And again, we give them the money, and then they redistribute and re-grant those funds out to different schools and organizations in Fort Worth. And they keep a little bit of the money that we give them to run their internal operations.
That is just so awesome here, especially knowing that you're coming to Houston.
I mean, there's a lot of great work in Houston. The Arnolds, who are supporters of ours, obviously support a lot of the work in Houston, a lot of the great schools that are there. So, and there are a lot of great schools in Houston, a lot of great charters. So, I think probably the next year or two we'll know kind of what our effort in Houston will look like.
And so if, somebody wants to get information about that, how do they go about doing that?
Probably Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter. So just, message me or is probably the best way. Oh, great. Just put up my Twitter. So that's how you can contact me on Twitter. And I'm pretty responsive. So I may not get back to you right away, but promise I will get back to you. And I would love to connect with anybody who's listening who wants to learn more.
That's great. And then, so the thing there's two things I like to know is, what is your next adventure, and what tips do you have for parents?
I don't know.
You give it a lot, by the way.
I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty happy what I'm doing now. Our organization is still young. It's only in its third year. So I kind of like being in the startup phase of an organization. So I'm having a lot of fun right now. So I don't know. As far as advice for parents, I mean, I think the one thing that parents often lose sight of is that your child, wherever they're in school, brings that particular school, in Houston, it's probably like $10,000 a year. And that represents power. And so, whether that power is expressed as you going to the school and, voicing a concern about how a teacher may be treating your kid or the curriculum and what the kids are learning, or something different. But, I know we think about schools as, free public education, but that school is getting money, and that school is getting money based on your kid going there. And so in a sense, you're paying $10,000 a year for your kid to go to that school because we all pay taxes. And so I just think a mind shift in what the relationship is. It's not, hey, we're lucky because our kids get to go to this free school. It's no, I'm paying through my taxes $10,000 for my kid to go to this school. And damn it, I should get what I deserve. And so, one, I would never hesitate to be an advocate, and don't feel like you don't have a place to do that, because you do. And there's power in the fact that you have your kid in that school. And there's also power in choosing. And so if you're not happy, I guess my last piece of advice would be, maybe you can afford private school, but that doesn't mean there aren't other options. I would explore what those options are. In a lot of places, there's organizations that can help families do that. But if you're not happy with where your kid is, you probably have a choice. You may not be aware of what that choice is today, but that choice probably does exist. And I would just encourage you to look into it.
That's great tips. I know parents, I always say is that we as parents have the power to make change in the realm of education. So students even your own student had access to a healthy environment, school options. So to get involved and stand up and raise your hand and ask those questions, like everything that you just said is exactly what you need, no matter what type of school that your kid is going to, whether it be your traditional neighborhood, public charter school, private school, homeschool, online school. Fight for those options so that not only that your kid can, have the benefit of that school, but all kids can. And that's what it takes for all of us to do, is to stand up and fight for those and support those schools. It's one thing that you did mention in our conversation is also supporting those schools and talking to legislators of how important school choice is in, locally in your city and in your state and nationally. Don't take away these options from us, but also educate them why you're so passionate about having those choices, because we do have to have those choices. I still fight, even though my kids are adults now, but I have grandkids. I have 2 grandkids to think about. I have nieces and nephews that are still in the public school system. I want to fight for them to have a good education and a better education, a high quality education.
Amen. Well said. I couldn't have said that better.
So, Chris, thank you so much for being my guest today. And I love catching up with you, my friend.
I know, that was fun. Thanks for having me.
And like you mentioned, if anybody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
At Twitter, I think that at Chris Barbic, just, send me a note and we'll follow up.
Great. And then another thing I wanted to bring up, I did bring up about Yes Prep Public Charter School. I am going to give them a little shout out because, if you are interested in about some information about Yes Prep Public Charter School, here is the website on there. And we will also have that in the description field, as well as they have open enrollment right now. If you're interested in enrolling your kid, they do now have some elementary schools.
Isn't that exciting?
I know. So check that out. I hope that you can, I hope everybody has enjoyed this information and hope that it was useful, that everybody can take this back and share this information with everybody. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching My Child, My Voice, Parent Connection show that's powered by National Parents Union. If you would like more information about National Parents Union, you can reach me at Wendy at npuunion.org, and I'm happy to answer your questions, especially talk about National Parents Union becoming a free member. Thanks so much, everybody. Y'all have a great day, and we'll catch you next week on Parent Connection. Bye.